G'day, welcome back to Collectivitis. Did you know that the average Australian university undergraduate degree costs between $20,000 and $60,000? And postgraduate studies can up that number by about another $100,000. And this is only the offer for domestic students. International students pay around 3 to 5 times as much. For a kid who's just finished high school and freshly turned 18, that's a lot of debt to take on board. So what exactly do they get for the low price of more money than they've ever seen in their life? Well, the truth is, not a lot. For decades now, university has moved from traditionally being an institution for the exceptionally gifted and, admittedly, the exceptionally privileged, to a government-enforced paywall barrier to industry entry where young adults go to socialise and binge drink as a kind of enormously expensive rite of passage. For starters, according to the Department of Education itself, for a standard 4-year undergraduate degree, over 60% of students will not complete the course as of 2020 data. Even if they do complete their course, another 20% of people, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, will work in a field unrelated to their degree. These are massive numbers and massive amounts of money being churned through universities for precisely no outcome. But that isn't even the surface of the scam. Universities as institutions have changed dramatically from their original functions. As I just mentioned, universities have historically been places for exceptionally talented people to go and further their studies so they could contribute to society at the absolute cutting edge. The vast majority of people didn't need to go to university to be employed. Most professionals didn't need to shell out hundreds of thousands of dollars and effectively surrender 4 to potentially 10 years of their working lives just to meet the minimum criteria to be hired. The truth is, most professional jobs shouldn't require university degrees. I'm a high school teacher, which is a fairly standard profession for most people to assume you went to university. I can categorically tell you there was nothing I learned in my 4-year teaching degree that I wouldn't have learned better by working in some form of apprenticeship program for a couple of years in a real school. The school wouldn't even have needed to pay me anything, and I still would have been better off in terms of experience, resources, years of my life, and tens of thousands of dollars than going to university. This is true for countless other industries the government mandates university degrees for. In the past, universities were a kind of trove of knowledge, a place you could go and dive deep into your studies. That was their appeal. With the advent of the internet and all that knowledge of mankind at your fingertips, people no longer need universities for any sort of knowledge. For the vast majority of uni-requiring jobs, there's no reason employers couldn't just set an entry exam to ensure a person has adequately studied and then take them on as a graduate or some kind of internship. So with the advent of the internet and the primary reason for the existence of universities having become obsolete, how is it that universities have more people on their books than ever? Well, you have the government to thank for that. To understand the government's motivations, we have to unpack a little bit of what the government, or the state, is. The government can essentially do two things. It can grow or it can shrink. It doesn't produce anything of its own, and anything it supplies is paid for in other people's money. Let's use the popular political compass diagram to understand this. When a government grows and expands the public sector, it moves towards the left. When a government shrinks and allows more of the free market to determine the allocation of goods, it moves towards the right. Some people do refer to this as left-wing and right-wing in politics, but that can be confusing, especially in Australia, because the Liberal Party gets called right-wing, but they've only grown the size of government in recent times, just the same as the Labor Party. As we can see from the fact that both major parties only ever grow the government, it is in the government's nature to expand. Like an organism that grows and feeds on resources, massive nation-states, since their inception, have always been in a trend of growth. Despite the fact that the vast majority of people acknowledge that socialism is bad, the government has in fact tended more and more towards socialism. The public sector is larger than ever, and the more the public sector grows, the more this allows the government to harvest the votes of the new people it employs to remain in a comfortable state. Well, what does this have to do with universities, you may ask? To paraphrase economist Hans Hermann Hoppe of the Austrian school, academic institutions have become allies of the government. The government provides academic institutions with a steady flow of money and pupils, and it does this by legislating that tons of industries can only accept university graduates. This completely reverses the trajectory to obsolescence that universities otherwise faced. Now, instead of their numbers dwindling as more and more of exceptionally intelligent people just learn things online and become successful in their own rights, universities are flooded with millions of young people who are blocked out of a massive sector of working society unless they pay the enormous fee of both time and money that it takes to go to university. In return, university academics are unlikely to criticise the hand that feeds them, and by a convergence of incentives, these institutions and their employees, for the most part, lean massively left-wing. That is to say, they favour the expansion of the state, more public sector, less free market individualism. If you've been to a university, you don't need me to tell you that this is the case. An economic or social conservative among professors is a rare find. Universities therefore act as the propaganda arm of the government and bombard their pupils with all sorts of social justice rhetoric. It is no accident that the highest proportion of socialist-leaning voters is exactly found among uni students. Uni students are for the first time in their adult lives being let out into the world, and understandably believe what they're being told at university by their professors to be true. After all, why wouldn't they? They are paying exorbitant amounts of money for this knowledge. As far as they're concerned, it better be true. So the government forces all these industries to only hire university graduates. Universities, in turn, teach young and impressionable students to favour left-wing big governments. The government then goes further and guarantees all student loans for university students through the HECS Help program started in 1989 under Hawke's Labor government. What does this mean? Well, it means that because barely anyone can afford university outright, the government ensures that the mandatory university attendance required by their own rules can be met without question. Virtually no one is denied a loan, and because no one is denied a loan and everybody pays the ever-increasing price for the ever-diminishing value of the service, universities continue to raise their prices due to this artificial demand. Nowadays, the same socialist university graduates who find their degrees either useless by design or recognise how expensive the institutions are, demand that their left-wing governments forgive student loans to bring the whole charade into a grotesque full circle where the solution is government printing more money out of thin air to cause inflation or increasing taxes to continue to feed the beast tasked with propagandizing the youth of the nation. So what is the solution? By now, this is probably apparent, but let's explore it anyway. The first thing that must happen is that government remove both overt university requirements for employment as well as subsidies and funding to incentivize employers to hire only TAFE or uni-accredited prospects. Government should also stop guaranteeing student loans. This would mean that someone wishing to undertake further studies would need to consider the decision far more seriously. They are investing in their own education. What would replace the student loan guarantees would be a series of scholarships or private loan guarantees from industries who would still want their employees to be university graduates. Without allowing the free market to determine which industries these would be, it's hard to tell, but there would be some. Regardless, it would instantly mean far less demand for university across the board, as young people can now compete for jobs in the market, likely taking on lower wages or internships or apprenticeships for the first few years compared to their more experienced colleagues. Universities would need to adjust. No steady flow of young minds to propagandize at the behest of the government that funds them. Universities would specialise and cater to the industries which independently choose to require university degrees. They would need to shrink, and swaths of useless bureaucratic academic intelligentsia would need to be sacked. As with everything, there would be periods of adjustment, but in the long run, as is always the case, less government intervention would lead to a more productive Australia. Less people's full-time jobs would be occupied with researching, writing and teaching biased subjects to indoctrinate pupils, things like gender studies, Indigenous studies degrees, global justice and environmental sustainability subjects, and annual reports on racism, to name a few. These people would, in time, move to more productive sectors, a lack of production being one of the key factors contributing to Australia's inflation, along with the government's ceaseless money printing. Smaller governments and less government intervention would allow education providers to adapt to what the modern world dictates. In a world where all of the education and acquisition of just about any skill can be found freely online, education providers cannot possibly hope to barricade access to their teachers and qualifications behind giant paywalls and government mandates. Thank you for listening. Please like and share if you enjoyed this. Subscribe for more collectivitis.